Okay guys, so today we're going to do a quick tutorial on editing basics in Lightroom. So the first thing we're going to want to do is bring up Lightroom Classic. There's going to be two different versions of Lightroom you'll see when working in your Adobe Creative Suite. We're going to have Lightroom with the rounded edges, and then we have Lightroom Classic, which has a little C behind it. Sometimes on the computers in the lab, it's going to have like sharp edges and a different color. We are going to be working on a Lightroom Classic for this class. The reason why, Lightroom Classic has a little more function, a little more tools in it, allows you to get more out of your edits, where the new Lightroom is kind of a streamed down version that's made to pair with the mobile app. So what is cool is in this Lightroom is you can put some of the presets, sync them to your phone, but we're going to learn today how to make a preset here in Lightroom Classic, which will allow you to have a little more creativity, a little more say in what your image looks like. So first thing we're going to do is open up Lightroom Classic. Now comes the part where we have to get the photos off of your SD cards. So SD card etiquette is a really big part of having success in editing photos and keeping just a happy career as a photographer. If you don't manage your raw files, you are going to lose photos and you're going to get super bummed out. So the first thing you want to do when we add photos to our computer to edit is we want to pop those images into our card reader. And then we want to either make a separate, if we have an external hard drive, make a separate folder to put those images into. Or if you guys have a flash drive, you're going to do the exact same thing. Plug the flash drive in, drag and drop your photos from the SD card onto the flash drive. Make a folder titled the location where you shot the photos and the date that you shot them. This will help you in the future once you start getting more photos to keep things organized. So once you drag and drop those images from the SD card onto your flash drive, if you don't have a flash drive or an external hard drive, create a folder on the desktop labeled, the date and the location of the photos. Drag and drop your files into there. The reason why we are dragging and dropping the files off of your SD card onto a separate folder or onto a separate hard drive is when editing with Lightroom, it is not going to store the files within the Lightroom app. It only references them to their original location. So if you do not import these photos off of your SD card and onto a separate space like a folder on the desktop or an external hard drive or flash drive, the only time you'll be able to access and edit your photos is when your SD card is plugged in. And that may be fine if you're able to sit down and knock out a whole editing session, but you run into problems where you shoot, let's say a couple hundred photos, you fill up your memory card, you import them into Lightroom, and you don't get to edit them all in one day. Well, if you export your SD card, you format your card because you're out of space, you will never be able to go back and edit those photos again. So it's super important that after you shoot your photos, view your SD card not as a permanent resting place, but only a means to transport them to a separate folder or a separate file. So in my case here, I have a lacy external 1 terabyte drive. Don't mind the clutter right now, it's an absolute mess. But I created a folder labeled 1 to put my test photos that I'm going to be editing in today. So we're going to open up Lightroom Classic. You will see over here on the left, it's going to talk about your catalog. For most of you all, it's for where it says all photographs, it's going to be 0 since you haven't used Lightroom under a username. I've been using this Lightroom account for probably 2 years now, and you'll see I have just about 80,000 raw photos in here. So you'll have your photographs, your sync collections, quick collections, and your previous imports. We're not going to deal much with that. Underneath folders, you're going to see the location of where your photos are. So I have my Macintosh hard drive, which I do not put any of my photos on, because as you start shooting photos, you'll start to see that it accumulates space on your hard drive and it'll really slow your machines down. So that's why I preach getting a flash drive. That's why I preach getting an external hard drive. It costs you a little bit of money now, but it will save you headache and stress later on when your photos do not crash your computer. So listed underneath Macintosh hard drive, I have all the other external hard drives that I have plugged in that are associated with this catalog. Right now, I've got I got a 1 terabyte drive and two 2 terabyte drives put in. I like to keep my drives listed by the year. And then within that, that one's not a good example. Within that, I have sub-year folders, and then within the sub-year folders, I have like my raw photos, and then it's listed out. It's like campus shots. I have headshots, and I have photo shoots. And then within that, subfolders of all the raw files, just so I can keep an idea of where things are hidden at. So over here on the right, we have some quick develop tools. We're not going to deal with that. We have keywording. We're not going to deal with that either today. Our metadata, that's just tagging words and keywords onto images. So in the future, with 80,000 photographs, if I want to look for a photo of somebody smiling outside, if I put metadata on my images when I imported them, I can search and find those photos. I typically like to keep my stuff organized by folder just so I know where they're at. That helps me more than metadata, but who knows, maybe in the future I'll use metadata. So I'm here on my main page. Up here in the top right, you will see all the different tabs that you can find in Lightroom Classic. We have the Library tab, Develop, Map, Book, Slideshow, Print, Web, and then syncing for the Creative Cloud. Good news is we are only going to be working with Library and Develop. In my 7 or 8 years of using Lightroom, I've only clicked on Slideshow and Print and Web as an accident. I'm sure there's great tools for you to create a visual slideshow or prepare images to be printed or for the web. I like to use Photoshop for that. That's just, it makes more sense to me. So we're just going to be working on Library and Develop today. All right, so now the next thing we're going to want to do is once we have our photos off of our SD cards onto an external location is import them into Lightroom. So we're going to go up here to File. I'm going to click Import Photos and Video. It's going to open up a new dialog box here. Over here on the left, you're going to see all the different sources of where you can pull photos from. It'll have your computer's hard drive and then any of your external hard drives or flash drives that you have connected. If your photos are on one of those flash drives, click on that drive, navigate, find that folder. If you saved it onto the computer's desktop, you want to use the computer's hard drive as your source. I save my photos onto my Lacy external 1 terabyte hard drive. So I'm going to click on that and click the folder which they are found. Sometimes if you've already imported your photos, since I've done this to do demos, they will show up as unavailable. If that's the case, look over here to the right. It'll say don't import suspected duplicates. Unclick that and it'll allow you to bring them back in. So I've got 5 photos here that we're going to be editing from. I have them selected. I'm gonna go down here to the bottom right and hit import. All right, and it's gonna bring those photos into my library. So over here, I can navigate through my external, click on the folder. It's going to show those images. One thing you'll notice is go down to the bottom of your screen, and if your screen looks like this, you're going to see an arrow. Click on that, and it's going to pull up your film strip. Now, the film strip is a great little tool that allows you to see the photos in your folder in sequential format. A lot like a film strip on a 35mm camera. This is a really useful tool to allow you to quickly move between photos as you're editing. You can move through your photos when they're highlighted by using the arrows as a quick key cut or a shortcut. So now we have the photos into our library. We are now going to click on the Develop tab. Clean up this a little bit for you guys. So we are in the Develop tab. Some of the things you will notice over here on the left is there is going to be a little quick preview of your image up on the left, allow you to see it at a different angle. I don't really know why it's there, to be honest. Down here we have our Presets tab. Under Presets, you're going to see Color, Creative, Black and White, and Defaults. We're not going to mess with Presets. Presets is a programmed color grade that you can apply to your photo, or an editing style you can apply to your photo. And the presets that they have set in with Adobe Lightroom are a little too basic, not creative enough for us. So what we're going to do today is learn how to create our own presets to apply to photos. So we have our presets over here. And the other important thing we have is our history. The history will chronologically update all of the edits that you make to your photograph. So if you have a photo, you make it bright, you take highlights out, we take shadows out, we take texture down, vibrance up, you'll notice every change we make shows up in the history. That allows us to click and jump back to a certain point of the edit. And then you can also click and Command Z, step back, and it will just undo each of the edits you have made. So history is important. Don't worry about collections. History and presets are the important tabs over here on the left. So now we are going to start editing over here on the right. You're going to have all of your editing tools for your image. First thing we are going to see is the histogram. This is a visual representation of the amount of highlights, midtones, shadows that are in your image. You can click and edit your photo through here, but it's way too difficult for us to be working on right now. The basic tools is where we'll mess with all of our exposure, contrast, those things. The one thing that histogram is important for is if you're looking at your photo, you like the exposure, you like the sharpness in it, and you can't remember the camera settings, if you put your mouse over here in this gray area, you'll notice that in the histogram, it shows your settings that the photo was captured at. ISO was 360. My focal length was 90 millimeter. Aperture is f14, and I shot this at 1/160th or 160 on my shutter speed. I'm going to close that out. So the first tools we are going to see is this little basic toolbar up here. You're going to have, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different tools that are real quick and easy to work with. First one, if you hover your mouse over anything in Adobe, it's really, really nice because it will give you the name of what it is as well as the keyboard shortcut to access it. So this first tool we have is the crop overlay. If we click on that, you'll see it will subdivide the canvas into equal sections and put in 9 different little editing points around the canvas that allow us to click and drag to adjust the crop of the photograph. So what's nice about this is we can click and adjust and make the crop however we want. But looking over here on the left, we are going to see the tool's name, crop and straighten. If our photo is not straight, we want to adjust it, line things up a little bit. We can click and drag the angle tool to rotate it. And we can adjust the aspect of it. So if we click here on original, it says the aspect is original because this is what the original file's at. We click on that, we'll drop down, open up a whole new selection of various aspect ratios to select. If we want the photo to be square, 1:1 crop ratio, we can click that and it will automatically set a ratio to that desired limit. I like to do 8:10 simply because it prints out nicely, but you'll notice when I put the 8:10, it changed it to a vertical. And when I click and drag, it stays constrained to that vertical crop. So what I can do is over here, this little lock button means that if it's locked down, it will stay in that constraint. If I unlock it, now I can adjust it however I want. So let's say I make a crop that I really like that does not fit into one of these presets. Say I'm really feeling this crop right here, but I want to make it a little bit smaller. I can hit the lock. Now my constraints are locked and I can adjust it, the crop like so. Hit enter to set the crop and you're good to go. I'm going to back up. I want my crop to be back to 4.5/8:10. 4.5 by 8:10 is a great number to have because if you ever want to make a print of that image, that's like one of the most common print sizes. So that is the crop tool. Next we have the spot removal. Now when looking at this image, I usually like to try and keep my photos super clean with a singular focal point on it. when looking at this image, I got this nice light bright sky with this huge dot right up here, right? I don't know what it was. Might be a bird, might be a dust, something on the lens, maybe a bug flying by, but I want to get rid of it. How can I do that? Well, with the spot removal tool, go ahead and click on it and bring it over here to the canvas. You will see a circle of varying size. Now, what this circle does is if you click on a spot, it will grab another area of the canvas that it reads has a similar tone value and substitute what's in that circle into the place that you clicked on. So if I click down here and I want this orange spot taken off the leaf, it will grab another area that has a similar tone value and replace it. But what you'll notice is sometimes it's pretty clunky when you're trying to do textures because it just repeats the same pattern. So when looking at this image, if you were to really pay attention to it, I'd say that's pretty noticeable that they're the same. But where this really shines is in a spot like this, where I have this little dot in a big white background or a big solid neutral color plane. So what I'm going to do is adjust the size of my circle. Feather is how soft the edges are going to be, and opacity is how opaque it's going to be when we substitute it in. So just about right size. I'm going to put that dot right in the middle. I'm going to click. Lightroom's going to do its thing, and it's going to read this section of sky as being similar to this, and it's going to substitute this section of sky over where that dot was at. I'll click done down here in the bottom right or hit enter, and voila, the dust is gone. So that is the overlay tool. Next we have the red eye tool. Most of your guys' photos are not going to have a red eye. We usually see that in older cameras with harsh direct flash and a dimly lit area. We're not going to be doing any photos like that, but if you ever have red eye, know that there is a tool there. Next we have the filters. We have the graduated and the radial filters. So let's click on graduated filter. It's going to bring up a whole masking effect and all different types of adjustments that you can make. And so when we go to our canvas, we'll notice we'll have this little plus sign for where our cursor's at. And so click and drag, you'll notice these 3 lines pop up. And what that is the graduated filter. The graduated filter is a nice, smooth, gradual blend from the area you clicked until the area you released. So if I drop down my filter here and make some adjustments, I'm going to take the exposure down. You'll notice that down here at the bottom where I clicked is going to be the most heavily edited area where that negative 1.38 is really going to show up, and then it gradually lifts out of that. Say I don't want it to be darker, but I want this part of my photo to be brighter. I can adjust my highlights or my exposure to make it brighter and then slowly ease into the rest of the canvas. What I like to do with this tool is, in my photos, I like to have this singular focal point. So in an image like this, I got all this subject matter in the foreground, and I want to get rid of it. So what I'm going to do is drop a little V in down here in the corner, extend that out to get a nice smooth gradual fade, drop my exposure down, boom, drop my exposure down. That gives it some nice framing where we have a clean subject matter and not a lot of distracting lines in the corners. That's a gradual filter. Radial filter works the exact same way, but it's circular, so it's only applying that edit to anything within the circle, or if you hit invert, it'll apply to everything outside the circle. Let's say you put one of these filters down and you want to get rid of it. Click on that tool, and it will show you a little gray nozzle where that tool is applied. Click on it, hit delete, you're good to go. Last tool we have up here in the little tool bin is the brush, adjustment brush. So what this will do, it'll allow you to change the size of the brush, and you can paint on essentially the edits that you want to see. You'll notice when I brushed it on here, it brightened it up a little bit. That's because I had the exposure set up a little bit higher on the brush. But you can make things brighter selectively or darker. Next up, we have the Basics tab. This is where you're going to be doing, I'd say about 85 to 90% of all of your preliminary editing on your images. So let's find another photo. I'm going to select this photo that I have here. Nice little waterfall. It's sideways. So what I'm going to do is hit Command or Control bracket, which is the bracket key. I'm going to straighten this thing out a little bit. I'm going to drop it at a 4:8. And here we are in the Basics tab. So we have our color profile. We can choose it to be a color picture, or if we click black and white, it will adjust it to black and white. I want this to be color. First tool we will see is WB, which stands for white balance. White balance is how your camera reads and adjusts to the natural and ambient light in a scene. When you're outside, your camera's going to do a pretty good job of knocking white balance out of the park first go on auto white balance. I would never take it out of auto for you guys. It's too much of a hassle in my opinion. But sometimes when you're shooting photos indoors, like this photo here, you may have competing light sources. We might have a cool natural light that's coming in from a window here, and then it's shining in across onto the table. And then you have these warm lights over here. So what that does is it creates a tough balance between cools and warms in your image. So our white balance, when we click on the profile over here, we'll see it set as shots. When you click on that, there's a couple different pre-registered settings for different scenes. And there's also an auto tab, which most of the time auto tab will treat you right. But if you select auto, this photo might be a little bit too blue for me. What I'm going to do is do some manual adjustments of the temp and the temperature. Temp is how cool or warm your photo is, and the tint applies to the amount of greens and magentas in your image. The more blues you add into your photos, oftentimes you have to balance it out with a little more magenta, and the more warms you put in, sometimes you need to balance it out with a little bit of greens. But I think this white balance is pretty correct here. What's tough about white balance is there's no special set perfect formula for it. It's all dependent on how our eye sees the color and how we want the color to be perceived in the image. So, leaves you for a little bit of interpretation. One thing, a trick that you guys can do if you shoot the photo out the camera and it looks awful, it looks something like this, right? You can't get the white balance. Auto isn't helping you. The last tool we can use is the color dropper. So what this color dropper is going to do is we need to find a picture on the composition, an area on the composition that has neutral colors and colors that are very similar and like each other. Look for an area that has not pure white, but like a cream color or maybe a light gray. How you can find that target neutral is you'll see underneath my little grid that pops up, you'll see RGB, and it'll show the percentages of each of those colors in that section. We want to find something where those numbers are pretty close to each other. So right in here we have, 95, 83. That's pretty close. I'm going to click. And it's going to adjust the white balance according to that as the target neutral. Does a pretty good job. So the next editing tools we're going to see is the tone. There's an auto tone button. Do not do that auto tone. Do it yourself. You'll learn way more. First sliders we have is the exposure and the contrast. Remember, exposure is the amount of light or dark that we allow into an image, and the contrast is how well the colors stand out against each other. So when shooting your photos, good news is if you don't nail exposure in camera, you can adjust the exposure in your Lightroom to compensate for that. This photo, I think it's pretty well exposed. I like where it's at. A little dark over here on this side of the face, but we will adjust that in just a second. So I'm gonna up my exposure by a little bit, bump the contrast and give it a little more of a punch. I'm actually going to cool it off a little bit, take the temperature down. Maybe a little too much. Right there is good. Next sliders we have are the highlights and the shadows. What's cool about this is this will allow us to adjust the brightest brights and the darkest darks in the photo without fully adjusting the exposure. So let's take a look at the bright areas in this image. We have the light here and the light from the window. So what I'm going to do is slide that highlights down. You'll see that I decrease the intensity of those brights, or I can increase the intensity. For this image, I want to pull a little more information from this light, so I'm going to drop the highlights down. Now shadows works the exact same way, but it works opposite. So it's about the darks, the intensity of the blacks in the image. So if we drop the shadows down, you'll notice the areas that were dark in the photo become even darker. Or if we slide it up, those areas become lighter. Now, this is a really easy way to run away with image editing and get something that looks a little wonky and non-realistic. So keep these tools in mind that you can really create something that doesn't look like it's in nature. When we look at objects, when light hits them, there's going to be naturally dark areas, there's going to be naturally light areas. What beginner photographers tend to do in photos like this where there's a landscape, they tend to drop the highlights all the way down to get rid of the high tones and take the shadows all the way up to make everything like a nice flat color. And it really can lose its naturalness, which I think photographs should have like a little bit of grounding in reality. So be wary of using your highlights and shadows. Very easy to get out of control with those edits. The next sliders we have are the whites and the blacks. Again, this is going to adjust the intensity of the whites in your photo or the intensity of the black areas in your photo. Typically, blacks I like to bump up to brighten up a little bit, and what I'll do is decrease the intensity of my whites. So, after we have tone, we have presence, which you'll see texture, clarity, and dehaze. Texture is a nice little tool that allows you to increase the contrast on the areas of texture that are within your photograph. Play with that, we'll bump it all the way up. We see that these lines become way more refined, way sharper, and likewise, if we slide it to the left, it becomes like a waterfall, watercolor. This looks like something out of a comic book, right? Doesn't look very real. If you have an image with like photos of rocks, wood, concrete, something like that, play with a little texture and may add a nice little pop to your image. Next we have clarity, which clarity does a similar thing to the texture, but it affects the highlights and shadows in your image and the contrast around them. So if we slide the texture all the way up, you'll see it becomes way more heavily contrasted, which I don't really think works for this image. And if you slide to the left, the intensity of the whites and the blacks is like completely gone. So I'm gonna leave the clarity, maybe bump it up a little bit. Dehaze is just another way also to soften your image if there's natural haze in the photo, or if you wanna act like there is with your edit. I'd stay away from that. Again, some of these tools is when you start getting into like a bad Photoshop territory where it can really get away from you really, really fast. Last two sliders we have down here are the vibrance and saturation sliders. Now, vibrance and saturation affects the intensity of the colors in your photograph. Your saturation is going to boost intensity of all the colors. And so if we slide that slider all the way up, the greens become good God green, and everything else becomes like, holy smokes, there's a lot of color in that. If you slide it down, boom, black and white, no saturation in the image. Now, what's different about saturation and vibrance is saturation will boost all of the colors equally. We see these skin tones here, these midtones, get bumped up. The orange turns to like a bright red. The blue gets turned to a bright blue. The green gets turned to a super bright green. Now, if we do this with vibrance, you'll notice that the skin tone doesn't nearly get as affected. So vibrance affects the saturation of the colors, but it stays away from those neutral and skin tones a little bit better. So if you're shooting a photo of a portrait of somebody, you want the colors to pop without them looking like an Oompa Loompa. Bump your vibrance up a little bit. If it's too intense but you still like that vibrance, bump the saturation down. That's what I typically like to do. Find the nice little middle ground where it pops, but it's not overwhelming. The Close Basics tab. We have the tone curve next. We're not going to worry about that in this class. The next slider we're going to work on is the HSL/colors tab. Open that up. You'll notice HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. If just one of them is popped up, click over here on the right and it will open up all of those sliders. Now what these sliders will do will allow you to adjust the hue, the saturation, and the luminance within the photo. Now the hue is the color qualities of each of the photos. There's got to be a better word for that. What it means is it allows you to adjust the look of the reds, the orange, yellows, and etc. in your photograph. So this photo here has a ton of green. So what I can do is grab my hue slider and adjust the tone of those greens. If I want them to be more yellow greens, or if I want them to be like a super emerald, shamrock green. What I typically like to do is make my greens a little bit yellow because I don't like greens, I don't like blues in my photographs. Let's go to another image here. Maybe this one of Jalan we might be able to pull. So we have some maroon in here, some red. So what we can do is adjust our reds. You'll see a little bit of red in the skin to pop up as yellow or as more dark pure red. I like more dark pure red when dealing with darker skin tones. Darker skin tones, you're going to have more reds and oranges in them. With lighter skin tones, it's more like greens and yellows that pop out of those. We're going to take my oranges up a little bit. We're going to make my yellows a little more orange. So that adjusts the look of your photograph. Again, this is a tool that can really get out of hand really, really fast. So keep that in mind when you're editing. Don't be afraid to take a breather, step outside, and then sit back down at your computer. Saturation will allow you to affect the intensity of a single color in an image. So we're going to go back to my waterfall photo. Lots of green in here. If you notice, I can grab my green sliders and take all of the green out, or I can add all of the green back in. When you guys are working with these sliders, try and think of them as working together. This is a band and not a solo act. So as we decrease our greens, our yellows and aquas and blues are probably also gonna have a little bit of reflection of what we would consider green in them. So slide those down, even it out. Don't make it just one big jumping process. It'll be more visually pleasing to the eye that way. Last tool we have on this slider is our luminance slider. Now, luminance is the amount of lights or not the amount of darkness that's in each of our colors. This image right here has got some real nice red up here in the front. So if I up my luminance, you'll notice those reds become lighter and brighter. Or if I decrease my luminance, they become darker. We're going to up the greens here. You'll see more light only on the greens, or you'll see less light on the greens. When I'm shooting photographs, I like to have one or two colors of emphasis within a photo. This photo, my two colors would be red and green. So what I would do is, rather than just bumping my saturation up on my greens and my reds, because that kind of gives a little bit of a wonky feel, I might find ways to add a little bit of light to the red to make it pop, and maybe a little bit of light to the green to make it pop. So that is the HSL sliders. Next, we have split toning. We're not going to fool with that. The next thing we're going to talk on is the detail tab. Click on detail, open that bad boy up. You will see two tools, the sharpening and the noise reduction tool. So sharpening will allow us to adjust the natural sharpness in an image. Again, this is a tool that you'll notice portraits of people. If you blow the sharpness up, you suddenly start getting these tacky little lines and grain dots on the skin. It really accentuates the human pores, which is not really what we want to do with photographs. So I think there's a good happy medium of having just like a little bit of sharpness to help give it a pop, but without completely overdoing it. The next slider we have is the noise reduction. So if we zoom in on this photograph, we see a little bit of noise. There's some speckling and some dots just from the camera sensor capturing the image. What noise reduction will do will decrease those dots and those specks. But what it also does is it smooths all of the other lines. Let's look at the knuckle right here. We got some lines, some creases in the skin. If we bump noise reduction up, it becomes a bad Photoshop. So when working with noise reduction and sharpening, It's a tough tool to keep tasteful. Again, we want these photos to look like they're based in our real reality, right? So figure out that balance between those and happy editing. If your photo has too much noise, what you can do is up your noise reduction, but then see how it will smooth it out. So then you can bump the sharpness back up and find a nice little common ground there. You can use this to save images that are potentially ruined by high ISO or low light shooting. Next, we have lens corrections. They're not going to fool with that, not going to fool with transform or calibration. The last tab we're going to use is the effects tab. So the effects tab will allow us to do two things: add grain and add post-crop vignetting. So let's go here to this first image. What vignetting does is, let me take off my radial tab, my radial filters. So what vignetting does will allow us to either increase the darkness in all four corners or increase the relative brightness. So we can either completely white out the corners, or we can completely darken out the colors, or find a happy middle ground. So when we talk about using those graduated filters in the beginning, I like to use those to decrease some of the info and bring that focal point in the middle. Vignetting will allow you to do that. The problem is when I increase my vignette here, it adds dark to all four corners, even though all four corners aren't naturally dark to begin with. So that's when we start seeing this burned out effect in this top corner where it's real nice and light. It really kind of shows our hands of what we did on the edit. When editing photos, the best way to do it is to make a successful edit that does not look like it has been edited. Find a way to hide your edits, make it look believable, make it look real. With the post-crop vignette, it's really hard to do that. So as we work with these post-crop vignettes, if you are using a vignette and you want it to decrease some of this visual area, but it's not working with the crop because you have a light area in one of the corners, think about your graduated filters or your radial filters. Sometimes though, if the photograph has, similar tones in all four corners, you will be able to darken them up without it being as insanely noticeable. And then I'm gonna go take my noise reduction back down on this. Last tool we have is the grain tool. Sometimes in our images, if we have photos with these dark, black, matted out sections that are kind of negative dead space, what I really like to do is add a little bit of grain. Grain is going to give us a nice little finite texture that will occupy that negative space and give the image a nice tactile feel. It also gives it kind of a retro look. Old film cameras have natural grain that shows up on the photographs. Again, this is a tool that you got to use it wisely, you got to use it responsibly, or the next thing you know, you're going to have a super blown out, poorly edited photo. So those are all the tabs we were talking about today. What's cool about this is we are going to show now what batch editing means and how to do it in Lightroom. So let's say I have this image right here and I like all the color edits I did to it. I like the grain I added, and I want to apply it to another image in my timeline from a similar day or similar lighting. So what I can do is go up here to develop and hit new preset. That's going to open up a new window that's going to allow me to change the preset name and allow the place where it's going to live at. I want it to be in my user presets. My name for this is going to be Photo 1 Test. Underneath the settings, you're going to see a bunch of little click boxes. Each one of these that's clicked, it's going to copy that setting and apply it to this preset. So I want all my stuff copied over, so I'll just hit create. Now what that'll do is over here in my presets folder, if I go to user presets, I will be able to find it. What do I call it? Photo 1 Test. I've got, as you guys can see, a whole bunch of different edits or presets for different set photos. I'm gonna go down here to Photo 1 Test, click on that. Cool, now I have a preset set. So if I go to this photo, I can just click Photo 1 Test and it will apply that same color treatment from here to this image. Likewise, let's go to one of these photos and I'll show you one of my other presets that I've made. Let's do Kodak Gold 200. This is a preset that I have made some tweaks and adjustments to over the years, kind of mutes the colors out, and we'll apply that to Jalan's as well. So I'll click on Jalan's photo, hit Kodak Gold 200, and we'll see it applies that same color setting to it. So what's nice about this is if I have multiple photos down here that I want this same preset applied to, right? I have my photo one test preset applied to this image. I can click Command A to select all my images, or I can Command click and highlight others. If I have this as my set photo with the photo one test preset put on it, I can go down here to the bottom right, hit sync, and it will allow me to synchronize the settings of this preset to all the other images I have selected and highlighted. So now that I've got my photos edited, the next thing I want to do is get them out of Lightroom to show my friends and family. So you guys probably have like 20 to 30 photos in your film strip right now, and you don't want to apply and edit and export all of those, because it never works out like that. Out of every 100 photos I take, I usually get 8 to 10 good ones if I am lucky. So what I'm going to do is go down here to my film strip, and let's say I want to export this photo and this photo and this photo, but I want to leave out this photo Joel and this photo Endless Wall. So what I'll do is, while selected on the film or the photo on the film strip, I'll hit P on my keyboard and flag that photo as a pick. Flag the next one I want to export as a pick, and flag the last one as a pick. Now I will be able to go down here to my filters in my library, hit filters off, and turn it to flagged. Now that will show me just the photos I flagged in my film strip. So I can select all or hit Command A. I'll go up here to File and hit Export. It will open up a new dialog box. This dialog box will allow me to select where I choose to put my edited photos. I want them to be in a specific folder. I want them to be, I'll click Choose here, and it will bring up my Finder. I want them to be on my Lacy hard drive in this folder here, so I'll click Choose. I want my photos to be a custom name. If I were to have them as the file name, when I export them, it's just going to be DSC 4005. That's going to be impossible to find in the future. So what I want to do for this photo is I want to do custom name sequence. That will allow me to change this as a custom name. So I'm going to do photo one test, and then it will automatically associate a number with it to keep them in sequential order. I'm going to leave all my other settings right. It'll do you good, and hit export. And it's going to export all the photos I have selected down here to the preset location. So I'll wait a second, they're exporting, and boom, I'm gonna go to my hard drive here, open them up, and you'll see I have 3 photos now. Photo one test 1, photo one test 2, photo one test 3. And all of them have my edits applied to them. Not very good edits, but I was just going to, trying to be quick with it. But that is Lightroom editing. That is the basics. With these tools here, you guys are going to be able to have a lot of fun this semester and do a lot of cool things. If you guys have any questions about that, please let me know. And if not, I will see you in class soon.